Okay, let's get started. Thank you so much for joining this press conference. It is being recorded and you can put questions in the Q&A. This press conference will feature speakers from a number of community groups and residents from around Montgomery County, including Silver Spring, Germantown, Chevy Chase, Wheaton, Potomac, Tacoma Park, Kent Mill, Kensington, Rockville, Gaithersburg, and Bethesda. We are speaking about a proposed county zoning amendment, which will allow streetlights and utility poles in front of our homes. A cell tower can be placed 30 feet from the home by right. It's called a small, short cell tower. And streetlights can be increased by 6 to 15 feet. There's also a petition that I'll put in the chat that has been signed by over 620 people calling to vote no on ZTA 1907. So this coalition has many residents involved, and there are also many community groups who have come on this call today. We're going to start with a panel of speakers, and I would like to start with Karen Lovejoy.
Hi, good morning, and thank you, Theodore, for putting this together. I'm Karen Lovejoy, and I am representing Community Vision for Tacoma Park. And we are hoping that at the end of this meeting, people will be outraged. Oversight and accountability in regard to cell towers is currently poor. And if ZTA passes, it will get worse. It will essentially be non-existent. A lot of residents don't understand that our current tower committee has been found to be lax. We found that cell towers are radiating 100 times over FCC legal limits, and yet they have been green lighted and rubber stamped for approval. And if ZTA 19 passes, it will just simply become a free-for-all for industry with no benefits to the consumer. Our council has written a letter asking for tighter regulations, and ZTA will do none of this. It will simply do the opposite. It will leave citizens vulnerable. Cell towers will go up 30 feet from home. There will be no notice. There will be no recourse. And we're really hoping that the community will get involved, will call your council and put a stop to this, because once it's done, we will seriously be pedaling backwards without recourse.
Thank you, Karen. And you were speaking about the Tacoma Park Council letter. Tacoma
Park Council letter, yes. There's a letter originated by the Tacoma Park Council asking for tighter oversight for our tower committee, which again is green lighting applications that should not be approved. And ZTA will be something that will mean that we have absolutely no voice, no notification. The little regulations that we have will become non-existent. We need something that's going to give us more teeth, more regulation, more oversight, more input from community, and ZTA does the exact opposite of that.
Thank you, Karen. And I'm going to put a link to the Tacoma Park Council letter in the chat. Next is Lisa Klein.
Good morning, Thea. Thank you for putting this together to get some accurate information out to the public and to even the council members who I don't think are operating with the correct data. My name is Lisa Klein, and although I live in Gaithersburg, which has its own ordinances regarding cell towers, that are, by the way, much more protective than ZTA 1907. I am here to talk about kids and the implications of this ZTA on our children. I have been a PTA leader for a number of years, and you know, the kids need a watchdog. So I'm very grateful that everybody here on this call is doing what they can to get the word out. In short, ZTA 1907 is a dangerous piece of legislation for children, for those that believe in science, and for the very idea that our elected officials are going to represent us. First, ZTA 1907 blatantly ignores the repeatable, peer-reviewed science that RF radiation can be devastating to human health, especially young people. Having just lived through a year where those who denied the science got very sick, I'm shocked that the Fed committee is relying on telecom industry brochures for its information. As a longtime advocate for children's health, I can't sit by and watch the council slow walk our kids into this experiment without any escape hatches, by the way. There's no setbacks from schools, and now there's no public hearing process. By now, most of us know that RF radiation is emitted from cell towers and is possibly carcinogenic. The World Health Organization lists it as a class 2B, which means it's as toxic as lead, DEET, and benzene. So putting cell towers just feet from schools and bedroom windows is like deliberately lacing the drinking water with lead or demanding that these kids pump gas all day. Secondly, the council has no plan to monitor the towers. In the US right now, 8 out of 10 towers are operating out of compliance with FCC maximum permissible exposures. And that's according to the Wall Street Journal. ZTA 1907 makes no provision to close this safety gap, and they never have. In fact, last fall, I had to file a Maryland Public Information Act to obtain all the RF monitoring reports ever done on our school properties. There are 11 towers. So going back to 2007, I got 3 reports and 2 of them were incomplete and useless. So trust me when I say no one's watching these towers. To restate my thesis, ZTA 1907 is very dangerous. It appears to be based on industry sales pitches and makes a lie out of any progressive values or child welfare concerns the council professes to have. Thank you so much. Thea, any questions?
Thank you, Lisa. Marion, and we'll have do questions at the end.
Okay.
Marion Eddy.
Marion Eddy, yes. Thank you to everyone who's joining us. A few years ago, the Montgomery County Council passed a resolution declaring the climate to be an emergency and saying they would do everything possible to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. If the Montgomery County Council really means that, they cannot pass this zoning ordinance. This zoning ordinance is designed to facilitate a massive shift away from the wired and fiber optic communications networks that we have now to a system that is mainly wireless. It's cheaper for the telecoms to deliver their wires and optics to the cell tower than it is to our homes and offices. But unfortunately, our existing wired and fiber networks are 10 times more energy efficient than wireless. It's much easier to send data through wire and copper than it is through air. There's an exhaustive study was published by the professional journal in the Institute of Electronics and Electronics Engineers that said, and I quote, "Wireless technologies will continue to consume at least 10 times more power than wired technologies when providing comparable access rates and traffic volumes. Higher energy consumption inevitably means higher greenhouse gas emissions." It may not seem like such a big deal historically, but global energy demand, even before the pandemic, was increasing by 9% every year. Global digital energy demand already is equal to civil aviation. We must do everything possible to make our transmission and our information as energy efficient as possible. And this ZTA takes us in the completely wrong direction. It is an energy hog. Wireless should be used sparingly to supplement existing fiber and wired networks, not to replace them, which is what the backers of 5G want to do. Otherwise, any energy savings will be quickly overwhelmed by the inefficiency of the technology itself and the tsunami of data produced as we digitalize all our machines using ever more trivial applications offered by an industry that's eager to create new products and market. Of course, we want good wireless connections in many places away from home. We've already got that. What we don't need are mini cell towers on every back street to bring 5G wireless to people inside their homes. 98% of Montgomery County households already have good wired and fiber access to their homes, and they should keep it. A broadband network bringing fiber to the premises is more energy efficient, it's safer, it's more robust in times of extreme weather, and it provides better, more secure computer service. So in the name of the climate, we must not pass this zoning text amendment. We need to be learning how to be thrifty with energy, not the other way around in a time of climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marion. Anita Prince.
Hello, my name is Anita, and welcome to this very important audience that we need to tell about what is happening to what is possibly happening to our children. I'm a school teacher, and I urge you not to pass the cell tower ZTA 1907. We have a right to demand that a commercial product that is being forced on every single Montgomery County resident be beyond question to significantly improve our citizens' lives. And that is not what is happening here. Have you been shown any science that shows that this huge level of cell tower exposure being proposed is safe for our children? On the contrary, we know that there are many long-term studies that show that this cell tower technology exposes our children to possible cancer, leukemia, heart disease, and many other illnesses. We cannot, in good conscience, force all our citizens to make this blanket decision to blanket our communities with this technology. The council is responsible for protecting us from unbridled telecom interest in increasing their profits. We say no to telecoms exposing our children's delicate electrical bodies to more and more radio frequencies. This has to stop. We require the council to limit our exposure until we know more about this long-term effects of this technology. Other municipalities have required setbacks from cell towers, and the ZTA does not require any more than 30 feet. Other municipalities are requiring 1,000 to 1,500 feet setbacks for commercial cell towers where children congregate. There in the ZTA, there are no setbacks for schools, for parks, or daycare centers where our children will be. This is totally unacceptable. In municipalities such as Palo Alto, Walnut City, Bar Harbor, Stockbridge, and San Diego, there are all setbacks for 1,000 to 1,500 feet to protect the children in those communities. At the very least, the ZTA should include some setbacks to protect our young children. I call on the council to use your ultimate power to protect our citizens so that we are not forced to succumb to this level of risk with no assurances that this will improve our lives significantly at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. And there are many reasons why people have come together, everything from the health issues, environmental, property value, the oversight process. And I am so thankful that we have so many voices here. Vicky Huo would like to speak.
Hello, glad to be here. My problem started at 2011. Both when my husband and I were out working, all of a sudden our front yard, a very short pole, 25-foot tall pole, was replaced to a 65-foot cell tower. And we were very upset. We had our neighbors signed a petition to request to remove this cell tower away. And without any result. By this time, Rick Meyer contacted me and showed me how this whole fiasco started. Turns out, Rick Meyer discovered the so-called Note 9, which is the one in my front yard, supposed to be across the street and 2 houses down on a pole. That pole has no house nearby, which is a very, very nice location. But for some reason, the tower, for some reason, they just popped up into my front yard because of convenience. And so we discovered the whole process of oversight is totally broken. You know, they have the tower committee to review the selected site, and turns out, okay, the site is not where they put. However, the review committee still signed off and approved the result. So it's totally disconnected from where its original intent to the final result. Montgomery County right now basically is a shame having a totally broken system just for the simple 4G. And I can't imagine when the 5G, you know, the ZTA 19.07 started, what kind of chaos they're going to create. They basically can pop up wherever in the middle of the street or in your front yard on the sidewalk to put in, and there's no recourse for the consumer to complain and adjudicate the issue. So we really need to remind Montgomery County the mistake they made, the holes they have in their current processing, and the even worse process they had in the future for the ZT 1907. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. When I speak about this around the country, people are astounded to hear that that has been placed in front of your home and the permit doesn't have that as the proper address and it's still there.
Yes, yeah. So we don't know what's the recourse, the way to change the situation. I already wrote to all the council members and the PEPCO, Crown Castle. They came over to take a look. Yeah, okay, we understand the issue, but there's no action to correct it. So that's a problem.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It's incredible. I can't believe it's been so many years. Rick Meyer, please.
Hey, and you, Vic. So, poll that I actually studied the situation on back in 2017 when we got started in this was the cell pole in front of her house. And I figured if we could get an answer to how that pole went up, we could figure out why this dysfunction in the regulatory processes of wireless facilities on cell poles continues. And I'm sorry, Vicky, here I am 4 years later, having told you that we were going to get that pole removed, and it's still there. It's been there now for 10 years. And it has been a continuous process of deflection and finger pointing by various of the government. So let me explain to you how that and why that is. First, a quick introduction. Rick Meyer, the executive director of the Montgomery County Coalition for the Control of Cell Towers. What we started doing back in 2017 was researching these cell poles all over the county and trying to figure out how they got there. Were they compliant with what the Tower Committee, which under our wireless ordinances are supposed to regulate these things. And what we discovered going around the county, I think unfortunately the county records are inconsistent. We think there's less than 100 pole-mounted wireless facilities, cell poles in Montgomery County right now. But what we found out was more than 20% of them were non-compliant with the wireless ordinance. And when we went to the Tower Committee, when we went to the Department of Permitting Services, we were given deflections, we were given non-answers, silence, we were given incredulous reactions like, well, how could they have gotten a permit? And on and on and on. But no one ever would answer our question until very, very recently. In fact, just last week, we finally got an admission on videotape as part of a public information meeting that was being held for strand-mounted facilities, a completely new technology that's being introduced. A member of the Department of Permitting Services, very senior member actually, admitted that there is a two-step, what they call a two-step process right now when it comes to utility poles. And what that process means is that the Department of Permitting Services completely ignores the wireless ordinances, because they found a different ordinance that covers utility poles. And that ordinance says that the utility-owned pole cannot be issued a building permit. So they turn a blind eye to any changes, any modifications, any relocations, including what happened to Vicky Huo 10 years ago. Turn a completely blind eye to actions by the utility company at the request of and the reimbursement of a wireless provider if they make or change or modify or relocate that pole. And as in other words, allows everybody to sidestep any regulation of utility-owned poles. Now, why is that important? Because ZTA 1907 is about to unleash the floodgates. We are expecting hundreds more applications, and I mean hundreds more applications. And we now know that 1907 is a sham because if it's on a utility-owned pole, that first critical step where they're going to make the pole bigger, where they're going to put it in a different location, where they're going to shove it 42 feet in front of somebody's house or closer than even 30 feet to somebody's house, will not be subject to any regulation by the Department of Permitting Services. It also means it's not subject to any regulations by the Tower Committee or the Office of the Zoning and Hearing Examiner, regardless of what the Tower Committee says. And there have been situations where the Tower Committee has required conditional use hearings. Regardless of all of that, they ignore it. So this dysfunction, which unfortunately the chief sponsor of this bill has chosen to sidestep and ignore as well, is going to continue. And I apologize, Vicky, because in all likelihood, there will be hundreds more, if not more than that, hundreds more residents in Montgomery County that are about to see wireless facilities jammed in close proximity to their houses, and they will be able to do nothing. And this ordinance will do nothing to protect them.
Thank you, Rick.
I'd like to add something. May I have 1 minute?
Okay.
Okay, this pole in front of my house, only 32 feet from my children's bedroom. It keep on creating loud buzzing noise during summertime. So the Petco and the Tower Committee, the Crown Castle sent a technician. What do you think they did? They installed a big fan in there, try to cool down the system. So turns out we are not only having the loud buzzing sound during summertime, and also the loud fan noise. So you can imagine if they install the 5G, which is a millimeter wave, which will use much more higher energy, and the buzzing sound and the fan and everything, it caused the noise pollution to all the neighborhoods.
Vicky, be sure to remind them that it's 68 feet tall. The pole that was there originally was 25 feet.
Yes.
So they put 40 more feet. If you drive to see this pole, you can see it a half mile from her house. ZTA 1907 will only allow people that are 300 feet to any pole to have any say if there's any objection to be raised under certain circumstances. You can see her pole from a half mile on her road. 68 volt. It dwarfs everything on that road. It's higher and taller than the surrounding distribution lines where it was supposed to have been. And it's absolutely incredulous when you see it. And by the way, it's not the tallest in your neighborhood, unfortunately, but it is certainly the most obvious because of the layout on the road.
It is shocking that there is no enforcement of the laws we have. So how can we move forward when we can't even deal with the problems of following the law that we have?
Nope.
It's really
Not at all.
speechless. Nicole Williams.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Thea. My name is Nicole Williams, and I am a Montgomery County resident who is very concerned about ZTA 1907. The safety issues of 5G are very real. I have been informed that local PEPCO employees have been given the orders by their safety department not to approach 5G antennas while working on power lines. They must first call the company listed on the pole to have it shut off. Employees of telecommunications companies have confirmed my findings that technicians have been injured by 5G antenna radiation. The residents of Montgomery County would not have the same luxury of turning these poles off for any reason. There are members of this county council who seem to think that the only people complaining are privileged whites. Well, I'm here to make sure that they know that notion is false. Often, it is those who are privileged who have the time to dig into the details. Wireless antennas have already been installed on the rooftops of buildings in our county that are predominantly occupied by people of color. And for that very reason, we deserve a public hearing on this bill and the earlier ZTA 1802, allowing all of the community the opportunity to catch up on what they are unknowingly facing. As a Black woman who was not born into privilege, I'm very familiar with being mainly focused on surviving day to day, especially with this pandemic. That's a big reason why you don't, or you haven't heard from many people of color. There are also those who are separating from the system and or are not engaged in our local government in particular. Some are not technologists, and many others are relying on 5G commercials that only glamorize it, practically echoing the tactics of big tobacco. ZTA 1907 provides no assurance that it will bridge the digital divide, nor provide affordable computer access. In this country, there's already a long history of Black, brown, immigrant communities being impacted the most by environmental injustices, and 5G is undoubtedly bringing more of the same. If the county council truly represents us, then they should be informing the community that a cell tower is coming 30 feet from our homes. Government transparency is a big part of a healthy democracy, and we should not be robbed of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Courtney Gilardi is here with her daughter to share a story from Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Thank you for joining us, Courtney.
Thank you for having us. My name is Courtney Gilardi. I'm from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and this is my daughter, Amelia. Amelia and her little sister and I are just 3 of the 14 people who were injured when a 115-foot Verizon cell tower went up in our 35-foot height restricted neighborhood last year. We did not receive any notification that a tower was being built, nor did any of the abutters here on our 8 streets. When the tower was complete, we did not know when the tower would be operational. One day, my youngest daughter, who had just turned 10, came downstairs complaining that she was headachy, dizzy, and her head felt buzzy. When I called Verizon, they confirmed that that was the day they fired up the tower. My children have experienced headaches, dizziness, nausea, insomnia, skin rashes to the point where they have missed school. They can no longer sleep in their own rooms. And now they have been forced to leave their home and sleep on mattresses on the floor elsewhere at night to help alleviate the symptoms from the constant 24/7 exposure of a Class 2B carcinogen and environmental toxin that they've been forced to endure. By December, we knew 14 people who were experiencing symptoms, with an additional 3 people having developed cancer. Neighbors report insomnia, frequent nighttime waking, palpitations, AFib, ringing in their ears, dizziness, headaches, sensation that their skin is tingling and crawling. Women who have successfully navigated menopause have reported unexplained hot flashes, vaginal bleeding, and other hormonal symptoms. Our doctors shared with us the American Academy of Pediatrics position statement on cell towers, with studies confirming that living near them increased the risk for all these symptoms, including cancer.
Our headaches and nausea and dizziness don't stop on nights and weekends and special occasions. You can't turn a cell tower off or put it on airplane mode when you're feeling sick. We can't live in our home anymore. Our neighbors have moved because they have 2 young kids and their family has symptoms too. Some neighbors spent all their money sleeping in hotels, and when it ran out, they are now sleeping in their car away from the tower. Another neighbor has a stage 3 glioblastoma brain tumor, which was in remission, and now she is battling cancer again. No one should be forced to live like this. People get sick from cell towers all the time. We are not invisible. We've met so many others harmed by wireless radiation exposure they did not consent to. No one should have to be forced to move. No one should have to choose between their homes or their health like our neighbors and I have been forced to.
Our Pittsfield Health Department, they hosted a forum on the health effects of cell towers with experts Dr. Carpenter, Dr. Haru, Dr. Havis, and Ms. Symington. After physicians shared studies of biological harm, Board of Health members have committed to speaking to Verizon about having the tower removed. But removing a tower from a residential area, as we've heard today here, is much harder than preventing one from being placed near a home to begin with. Governments need to be accountable to the public, and laws need to be changed to protect our children, our families, and our health. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Angel Lopez, thank you for joining us today from Providence, Rhode Island, to talk about small cells that have gone up in your community.
Hi, I'm Angel Lopez, a Boston College graduate residing in Providence, Rhode Island, where cell antennas and wireless equipment is proliferating all over my community since the fall of 2017. Telephone poles here in Providence are covered with equipment boxes, cell antennas, and 5G antennas. In the past year, big rectangular boxes that aid the increased energy consumption of all the other new devices have begun to occupy the sidewalks. Yet most people remain unaware and uninformed. The Montgomery County ZTA 1907 is only for residential areas, but your council also passed ZTA 1802 that allows cell antennas 10 feet from buildings and homes in the mixed commercial residential areas. This is an environmental justice issue, just like in my community. How could someone allow cell antennas so close to homes? 30 feet is not far enough, but to allow an industrial emitter that operates 24 hours a day, 10 feet from a home is ominous. In Rhode Island, the utility poles that have cell antennas attached have little signs up saying radio frequencies beyond this point exceed FCC general public exposure limits. These warning signs are barely readable from the ground or non-existent in purely residential zones. Yet 5G and 4G antennas are bombarding the 2nd and 3rd story rooms in homes in a city where most houses are double and triple deckers. What about the people whose bedroom window is in the line of sight to these transmitting antennas? Claims are made that SMART is climate friendly, but all I see is more fossil fuel powered, dirty energy being consumed, more excessive wires, and ugly large boxes on the telephone poles. These installations are blocking our sidewalks and ruining our aesthetic, and ruining the aesthetic of our neighborhoods. That activity is decreasing property values while property taxes are increasing, and it will eventually make us all sick. I hope what is happening in Rhode Island does not happen in your community.
Thank you so much, Angel. Thank you for joining us today. So this CTA cuts the community out of participating in the decision-making process in regards to cell antennas in front of homes. And we're going to talk about two additional points which is bringing people together to want to halt this CTA, and that is property values and environmental impacts in trees. So many residents are asking and have asked in other hearings that have been on this matter, and there has not been a public hearing since 2019. The community is asking for a public hearing, however, there is none scheduled, asking, will we be reimbursed for the property loss from a cell pole in front of their home? I mean, how will the thousands of cell towers that are anticipated impact the county financially in terms of the drop in home values of those specific homes? Because if you can choose a house with a pole in front of it or a house a few doors down, which would you choose? And research shows that there's up to a 20% drop when there is a cell tower visible from a home. Montgomery County's own legal filings state in regards to small cells that are party to an ex parte that says the addition of facilities of this size diminish property values. So the second issue is tree trimming, which also is going to decrease property values and of course impact our tree canopy, which is we cannot afford to be damaging our trees. There's published research that is showing damage to trees from the radio frequency radiation, but also if the poles are going to be going up 6 to 15 feet, there inevitably is going to be trimming that's going to happen. Yet the ZTA has no protections or accountability in terms of the impact to street trees and the canopy, who's going to be trimming, where is the oversight, where is the enforcement? The Sierra Club of Washington, D.C. testified to the DC Council a couple years ago calling for protections for DC trees. And there needs to be an environmental impact assessment that considers trees, as well as impacts to pollinators and wildlife. The FCC limits were not developed. Those are the radiation limits from the cell towers, where they weren't developed to protect our flora or fauna or wildlife. There is no US or international authority that has expertise in science, biology, or safety that has ever acted to review the current body of research and develop safety limits for our wildlife. And that is part of our lawsuit, Environmental Health Trust et al. Versus the FCC, that we are awaiting a court ruling on. So there's also extensive research in the published literature, and most recently, a 2021 review by former US Fish and Wildlife biologist lead on cell tower impacts, Dr. Albert Manville, and other experts, which reviewed the science on impacts to wildlife. And I quote, ecological effects have been seen broadly on orientation, migration, food finding, and all of that is in published research, which I'll put in the chat while you put in your questions. So there is a lot that is missing from the CTA to protect the community, to protect the environment, to protect Montgomery County. You can put your questions in the chat, and I will ask them. And here is one right away. I think, Rick, this would be a great question to answer. How many of these small cell towers do you think industry plans to install? Are there areas of the county that the industry has prioritized them? And if you could also answer how many poles will be made available by right if this passes?
So you want me to take that one? All right, thank you. Let me take it in pieces, working backwards. How many poles are there that would be eligible? We estimate, based on data that the county has provided, which is incomplete, by the way, that there are at least 30,000. Let me repeat that again, 30,000 eligible poles around Montgomery County. And you have to count utility-owned poles. You have to recount anything that is used as a street sign or a street signal, a light signal, if you will. You have to count poles that are in parking lots of parking areas. You have to count those little spindly fiberglass poles that are in neighborhoods that have got below ground utilities. But without question, the key targets, and I think this is the heart of the question, the key targets are the down county, highly dense neighborhoods, suburban neighborhoods that are loaded with above ground poles and where there's a tremendous number of choices for the wireless companies to go after. The second area is up county, where there, as I just mentioned, where there's a lot of neighborhoods with below ground utilities, where the only way to get inside those neighborhoods is to rip out those little spindly fiberglass 15-foot lamp posts and replace them with 30-foot huge obtrusive antenna bearing poles. And that is absolutely a prime target of these guys. We already know that the leading provider of cellular technology in Montgomery County has a plan to install 118 strand-mounted facilities, new technology, which requires 3 poles in order to do it. To put an antenna up, one set of antennas requires 3 poles. So you've actually got the ability now to expand the footprint dramatically. So to answer that question immediately, I'd say there's probably more than 700 facilities in the next 24 months that will be scattered all over Montgomery County. And I base that on experiences of other suburban counties of our size, particularly those that are up in Long Island and New York State.
Thank you. And you said over 30,000 streetlights and utility poles would be made available.
Yeah, poles of any type that would be eligible. And what happens is people tend to only concentrate on certain, but I forgot to mention that 80% of the facilities that we are looking at right now are utility-owned poles. And again, as I just stated in my remarks earlier, those are completely outside of any regulatory controls whatsoever under the existing regime that our Department of Permitting Services is using. So there's no regulation whatsoever, even though supposedly the sponsor of this bill is claiming that there will be regulation. There's none at all. And we just found that out very recently.
Thank you. So I have a question. I thought Montgomery County had to do this because of FCC regulations that required localities to pass new ZTAs that would allow these small cells into neighborhoods. Otherwise, they would get sued, and otherwise it would be a prohibition of service. Isn't that correct?
No, it is absolutely not correct. Industry propaganda is stating that unless poles are put up 300 feet or closer to homes, that it is a denial of service or an inhibition of service. But this has never been proven by anybody, and no wireless carrier has ever taken a municipality to court over this question. The bottom line is that the very CEO of Verizon, in an amazing videotape back in 2018, claimed that he was building network capacity that worked at 2,000 feet. And by the way, it is Verizon that is the largest user of the millimeter waves and the ones that wants to get to the neighborhoods the worst. So why is it that we're having a chief sponsor of this bill claiming that he has to put them 30 feet from people's doors, or are we inhibiting service, when the CEO of Verizon says, no, that's not true, 2,000 feet, and it doesn't have to be line of sight. You can have trees or buildings in the way. So clearly the industry propaganda and the industry lobbyists have got the sway over the council, but it is factually incorrect. And there is nothing in the FCC rules that says that you have to shove this stuff up against people's front doors. Absolutely nothing.
Can I add something to that? It's the Congress and the courts, not the FCC, which have the authority to amend and interpret the telecommunications law, which goes all the way back to 1996. The industry likes to quote or talk about a ruling in 2019 in Portland. I guess no, it's 2020 in Portland. But that ruling had nothing to do with zoning. That ruling was about the shot clock. It was about fees. in our own circuit court, the last time, we're in the Fourth Circuit, last time this was ruled on, the court ruled in favor of the city of Fairfax, saying that to prevail, the wireless carrier must show either that a local governing body has a policy which guarantees rejection of all wireless services. And if that's not true, there's no denial of service. You know, Fairfax won. And in New York, the courts have reprimanded the FCC, saying it's not up to the FCC to construe the Telecommunications Act to say something it does not say. So it's not at all clear that Montgomery County can't keep its already very permissive zoning requirements that it has now, which are much more permissive, as we've heard, than say those, some of those that were mentioned in other cities. Even if the county got sued, they can't be sued for damages. So there's very little, they have more power and less risk than they want you to believe. They are playing dead in a way, playing weak, when they actually could be sticking up for the rights of citizens in a way that they're not, or contemplating not.
Thank you, Marion. It is being said that the ZTA, here's another question, is needed for equity in the community. What is your response to that?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I will take that. I will simply say that first and foremost, from what we've been able to discern as of now, cell towers irradiating 100% off the chart levels, not approved by above FCC limits, are currently in neighborhoods of low-income neighborhoods, in neighborhoods that minorities live in. They're on top of multiple dwellings. And historically, when there are questionable practices by industry, they target those neighborhoods. So right now in Montgomery County, we have cell towers, a proliferation of cell towers that are emitting over FCC limits, and they are predominantly in minority neighborhoods. Also, in terms of equity, in terms of equal access to the technology, the myth that these cell towers will create equity is just that. It is a myth. What we really need is, if the county is concerned about equity and people to have equal access, they need to consider subsidizing and going back to the FiOS fiber optics, which is safer, which provides better use, better service, a more secure service, and ultimately would be a cheaper service, and does not have to be, according to a quote from Verizon, they don't need installation any closer than 3,000 feet. So if we want to talk about equity, we need to go back to fiber optics if we are really concerned.
Thank you. And also, we have that other ZTA that was passed a few years ago, which is allowing, as Angel pointed out, cell antennas to be placed within 10 feet in the mixed commercial residential areas, which needs to be addressed urgently as well.
I would also point out that if the backers of the ZTA were so concerned about the digital divide, why is there no requirement or even incentive to the industry to bring services to the people that are now underserved, either the rural or the poor? There's nothing in this bill at all which would induce them to give service to those who don't have it. If they really wanted to care about service to these, then they should build out, as Karen said, they should build out the robust fiber net that the county already has and try to find ways to make it available to low-income people. That would do so much more to help than this, which only lets the industry put it where it wants to put it. And they're not interested in the poor.
Thank you, Marion. A question. Can you speak about how residents are currently subsidizing the cell towers and how it can be made worse with this ZTA? Where is the burden going? Where is the cost placed with this ZTA? Oh, Rick, unmute yourself.
I make some of my best answers, I say, when I'm muted. Sorry about that. Yes, the amazing thing of it is that Montgomery County has been testifying before the FCC for years, and this is in lawsuits that have been presented about the substantial and persistent subsidization of wireless companies because of the ridiculously low fees that Montgomery County charges and because of the expenses of processing these applications, particularly the engineering reviews, the site visits, and so on. However, the chief sponsor of this bill has done absolutely nothing to rectify the issues associated with this subsidization of going on. And again, this is all in testimony that Montgomery County has been presenting for years. And I want to make sure you understand that one of the members of the Fed committee, which so actively produced these ridiculous amendments recently to make 1907 even worse than it was, that particular member who supported this bill, his mantra is fiscal stewardship and the need to improve controls over inadequate or incomplete fees that are charged for various county services. And so here again, everybody's looking the other way because it's wireless and taxpayers have to foot the bill. And again, I would urge everybody to take a look at the FCC filings that Montgomery County has produced over the last few years on this very issue.
Thank you, Rick. Next question. Has there ever been a conditional use hearing for a wireless facility mounted on a utility-owned pole in Montgomery County?
That is an absolutely terrific question. And the answer is a stunning no. And it goes to prove what I mentioned before, that the Department of Permitting Services has been looking the other way for years when it comes to wireless facilities on poles. No, there has never been a conditional use hearing, and they would be required on any pole that is replaced, utility-owned pole that is replaced under the current ordinance, any pole that would be new. In other words, we have them all over the county where they simply put a brand spanking new pole mid-span that does nothing except hold on to a wireless facility, utility-owned poles that are doing this. And even though the Tower Committee has in fact made recommendations in the past when they reviewed applications and said there had to be a conditional use hearing, it was ignored. No one ever held one. So all this talk by the sponsors and authors of 1907 that there's going to be ability of residents to have a say, to actually be heard in situations where there are new poles that are going in or closer to 30 feet, is a total and absolute fabrication, because there's never been a hearing. And given the way DPS monitors this stuff now, there never will be. And why would the applicants even want to bother? They just pick another pole that would be outside of the requirements for conditional use if it looked like they're going to have one. And that is a huge if.
Thank you, Rick. So another question, what is needed? Is there a way to fix this ZTA? And I guess the second piece to that is about enforcement. Is there any movement moving forward that will allow for adequate enforcement on the current process that we even have? So what happens to Vicky does not happen to anyone else.
Yes, absolutely. And I want the other participants to weigh in as well. But if I can just state this very quickly, way back in 2019, when this bill was first introduced, the county executive put forth testimony calling on the absolute imperative of having all stakeholders, by the way, that would include residents who have been completely cut out of any of the writing of 1907, which is a 100% industry bill that has been written by industry lobbyists. The county executive called for a process that would engage all stakeholders, including residents, including property owners, everybody that has a concern about this, to come to the table and work up a plan. What we put forward was a tiered approach where we had a hierarchy that said, we know we have to allow these poles into Montgomery County, but we want residential areas, and that would include all residential areas, not just suburban residential areas, but residential areas including apartment buildings or condominium buildings or duplexes. Any residential area, it should be the last place to put one of these facilities where you would have to prove that there was nowhere else on a higher speed, higher volume roadway or somewhere else other than residential neighborhoods. As far as enforcement, if the authors of this bill cared, but they don't because they know this is a huge advantage for the wireless industry to have the dysfunction and the conflicts that are there now, they would go back and fix the regulatory mess that we've been in for the last 10 years, which has allowed utility poles to be exempt from the wireless ordinances. So there's lots of things that can be done, and those are just a short list of it. But clearly the sponsors of this bill have no interest in engaging residents or including residents. They just want to hand a gift to the wireless industry.
A gift to the wireless industry. Thank you, Rick. It's one of the equity concerns that a new 30-foot setback from homes disproportionately affects homes with smaller lots. Question? I know that there is a link to the Tacoma Park. I put it in the chat detailing issues related to equity, where that was addressed.
Yes, and it's a critical issue because of another dynamic that we've only touched on very peripherally today, but Montgomery County is absolutely glowing in 5G. And the reason they're glowing in 5G is because the first phase of the rollout of 5G antennas has been on rooftops. And the predominant buildings that those have gone up on have been apartment buildings all over Montgomery County. And those 5G facilities tend to be on buildings that are rental properties first. And we already know statistically that the probability of you being a disadvantaged population or disproportionately people of color are going to be in rental properties. So they've already got these massive antenna farms on their roofs, which have been very, very, very poorly regulated. And that's a separate topic we could come back to. But now they're going to be faced with these poles directly outside their windows on their sidewalks, because as we all know, apartment rules right outside somebody's windows. Worse than that, people of lower incomes tend to be on smaller lots. And those smaller lots tend to be, the house is closer to the, which means that the pole can be closer to that house, as opposed to people who are living in more affluent areas where the lots tend to be bigger and therefore farther away from the sidewalks. So disproportionately, people of color, people of lower incomes, people who have no choice but to live in rental housing will be already are disproportionately impacted by this and will be as this continues to roll out. But it's important to note that this ZTA is not subject to any of the social equity, racial justice ordinance that the county just passed. And one of the reasons we think that the author of this bill, the chief sponsor, is in such a rush to get it passed because they don't want it to go through that process. It won't be a good process for the whole case, the whole argument of social equity and racial justice.
Thank you, Rick.
Another point worth mentioning is that if you're an apartment builder, you're on the 3rd or 4th or 5th floor, these cell towers will be right across from you. And you'll be much more vulnerable than somebody who's living on the ground. So it's a double whammy for the apartment dwellers.
Yeah. And by the way, that already exists in Montgomery County. This has already happened in residentially zoned areas, again, because there is no enforcement on wireless facilities on utility poles. We already have at least one case where 27 feet from a I guess it's a 4-story apartment building in Piney Branch. Huge antennas, just 27 feet at window level. And by the way, the safety margins for most of those antennas extend out well over 30 to 40 feet for some of the antenna sizes that are being put on these poles. And again, there's absolutely no action by the Tower Committee or Department of Permitting Services to make sure that those facilities are meeting FCC requirements. And that's on existing cell poles in Montgomery County.
I'm going to do these last 2 questions. I think we sort of addressed this, but I wanted to really highlight it. The Racial Equity and Social Justice Act goes into effect in early September 2021. The act requires every proposed bill to detail the impact on equity among different demographic groups. Why would the council want to pass this zoning change in July when, if they wait till September, they could better understand the bill's effect on equity? And there is a work session that is happening on Tuesday where there could be a straw vote. At least that's what it says on the agenda, which I was first sent. Has there been discussion in the council at all about the implications of passing it now rather than waiting until September?
No, none whatsoever. And there are special provisions for zoning text amendments in that social equity, racial justice bill. But I can assure you that right now that the chief sponsor of this bill has absolutely no interest, as do all the sponsors, no interest whatsoever slowing it down for a social equity, racial justice process, nor do they have any interest in having another public hearing to allow people, as we're doing today, to make sure that the accurate information is clearly expressed out there. So no, there's been no conversations whatsoever on the question of social equity and racial justice.
What would a good countywide, I'm reading another question, a good countywide plan for the deployment of 5G cell antennas look like? Where should locations be prioritized for cell tower placement, and who should be able to offer input on the plans? How should the permitting and oversight process actually work? And what would you advise to the county to actually fix the broken process and the clear broken enforcement? If you could even say anything even exists for enforcement, which I'm not even clear anything does. I added that last phrase.
Well, and thank you. Let me stress to you that the county executive before the pandemic hit was provided with substantial input from resident advocates, and I mean substantial input to affect, first and foremost, the incredible conflicts and dysfunction, conflicts in the ordinances and dysfunction in regulation and of the wireless review process. In addition to that, we made substantial recommendations about, as I've told you before, this tiered hierarchy where there would be areas of preference, usually far away from people's residences and schools and daycare centers, as a first priority. And then the last priority would be anywhere near a residence. So unfortunately, the pandemic hit. And even though the council had made pledges to itself that it would not be addressing any sensitive or difficult legislation while we were in a pandemic, the prime sponsor of this bill didn't care. And back in February of 2021, he took a bill that had been essentially a zombie bill that was on sort of suspended animation. He resuscitated that bill. Then he brought it to hearings of the Fed committee, and they transmortified it into something even worse, completely ignoring that we were yet to emerge from the pandemic and still in a social emergency, but also ignoring all of the past input and pretty much cutting the county executive out, because the county executive, remind you, and their small team was trying to bring us out of the pandemic. So we're hoping that we can restart this process, that the council will give the county executive enough time to work out some details with all, I emphasize, all stakeholders. But the chief sponsor of this bill wants nothing to do with that. Again, the lobbyists and the chief sponsor are in a hurry to get this passed.
Thank you, Rick. And final question, is it true that Montgomery County sued the FCC to require updates to radio frequency radiation emissions? What happened to the suit, and did the council appeal the FCC action?
Well, this is the most ridiculous part of the whole thing, is that Ike Leggett, on his way out as county executive, way back in, I guess it was 2018, managed to get the council to approve litigation suing the FCC to update their RF standards. And Montgomery County by itself sued the FCC, not as a party or a co-petitioner, as is typical action in these kind of things, but we sued the FCC alone. And unfortunately, that suit got consolidated into the Ninth Circuit with a bunch of other litigation about FCC actions. And the FCC preemptorily took measures to say that they were concluding their review of FCC regulations. Although they made no changes, they cited no science. They said we're concluding it, and they cut the legs out from underneath the Montgomery County lawsuit. Unfortunately, in a closed session, oh, by the way, the chief sponsor of 1907 voted for that litigation. The chief sponsor of 1907 was a council member, voted for that litigation. I believe actually one other sponsor did as well, who was on the council member at the time. That litigation at a secret closed executive session in January of, I think I have this right, 2020. At that executive session, a decision was made not to appeal the FCC's peremptory order. So the Montgomery County, in this closed session, which has never been explained to the population with Montgomery County laws, walked away from their own lawsuit. And then surprisingly, 1907 gets introduced. But the whole thing was this closed session meant that there was no appeal coming from the principal litigant. Thank God, Theodore. And I say this with a huge thanks to the Environmental Health Trust. They stepped in, raised their own money, and continued the appeal process. If it hadn't been for the Environmental Health Trust, Montgomery County's own government turned its back on its own residents, refused to appeal the decision, the preemptory decision by the FCC, but a private group led by Montgomery County residents, I might add, including an individual who's one of the principal lawyer in this case, and your leadership through the Environmental Health Trust, Theodore, that suit's ongoing. But Montgomery County Council in a closed session walked away from the suit and never explained why.
It is quite shocking, actually.
It is.
We would have
It is
expected
shocking. Yeah.
that to be, them to continue to address it, because if we win the case, and we don't know yet, we're awaiting a court ruling, although the oral argument went quite well, it would then open up the questions that it quite possibly could open up the suit that Montgomery County raised. It would no longer be moot, depending on what the answer is from the court. So there are a lot of questions, a lot of legal issues there. So I wanted to wrap up. Someone asked about doing radio frequency radiation measurements before and after. Is there support for that? Just wanted to hit that, and also mention that FCC limits have not been updated since 1996, which is what our lawsuit is about. But what do our panelists think about having regular radio frequency radiation measurements?
I would bump that question to Colleen Cordes. I think she would be able to answer that best of all. Yeah.
I think Colleen's not here, but I know that is being addressed in many communities where they actually are doing that. And the challenge is, of course, that FCC limits are not protective. So even if there's compliance with FCC limits, that does not mean that there is safety, and certainly not for trees, birds, bees, and animals, because they're going to be so close. And Montgomery County actually did their own radio frequency radiation measurements, where they showed Montgomery County's contractor found the radio frequency radiation extended out in a plume that went about 10 feet in the worst case scenario, where it
minimum, yeah. Yeah,
it exceeded radio frequency radiation limits, exceeded our FCC limits within those 10 feet. And yet we have buildings that are now allowed at 10 feet. And not only that, but what about the animals that are right in there? Let's say that, FCC means safety. We have a lot that's in that zone. Our wildlife is in that zone.
Yeah. I'd like to speak to that particularly because we all know, or many of us know, that migratory birds and bees and other insects, they rely for navigation on the Earth's natural electromagnetic fields. That's how birds migrate. That's how bees get back to the hive. And we are now creating a cacophony, a total chaos of all kinds of man-made electromagnetic fields, which is going to receive a huge bump up under this ZTA. We're going to have many more of them. The 5G will be happening on top of what is already in there. We know that birds and bees are in steep decline. We have a lot of suburban beekeepers now who are trying to help pollinate our plants. Pollination we desperately need. You can kiss those suburban beehives goodbye under this.
I'd like to say something, Thea. I see it put in the chat, the petition for the attendees. Thank you. If you are really concerned about this, please sign the petition. I know I took the time to go around to my neighbors and on multiple occasions, and nobody knows about this. And it was just really shocking. So just share it with your networks. Tomorrow they are doing a working session. It will be streamed live. I believe I got the email too on their channels. But the petition is very important, and if you can do that, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And I found that too when I went around in my community, that people are unaware. There is a group, here we are, and there are over 600 people that signed on to the petition, but there are many, many people completely unaware that this is happening. And in other communities, when it happens, the community is outraged when a pole is built in their front yard without the people being asked. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. And this will be made available online. And you can go to the Action Network petition to send a letter, and also go to the websites in the coalition, which I will send out when we post this as well. Thank you so much.